A little boy stops the millionaire. "Don't drink, your wife wants you to." What happened next in that restaurant shocked everyone. The Starlight Bistro glimmered like a jewel in the heart of the city, its windows casting a warm glow onto the rain-slicked streets. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. This was a place where deals were made, fortunes were celebrated, and the city's elite came to see and be seen. At a corner table, bathed in the soft light of a crystal chandelier, sat Marcus Blackwood, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed back, his tailored suit a testament to his success. He held a glass of red wine, swirling it gently, watching the legs of the liquid slide down the inside of the glass. His half-smile spoke of satisfaction, of a man who had climbed to the pinnacle of success and found the view to his liking. Across. From him, his wife Evelyn sat, her emerald dress complementing her auburn hair. She watched him with a mixture of admiration and something else, something hidden behind her practiced smile. Her fingers toyed with the stem of her own wineglass, betraying a nervousness that seemed out of place in such opulent surroundings. "To another successful year," Marcus said, raising his glass in a toast. Evelyn's smile widened, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. As they clinked glasses, neither noticed the small figure that had slipped through the restaurant's revolving door, carried in on a gust of cold air and desperation. Tommy Harris, all of 10 years old, pressed himself against the wall near the entrance, his heart pounding. He shouldn't be here, he knew that. The maitre d' had already shooed him away twice today, but hunger was a powerful motivator. Sometimes, if he was lucky, he could snag a piece of bread or a leftover appetizer from an uncleared table before being noticed. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the scene. The crystals on the chandeliers reminded him of icicles, beautiful, and just as untouchable. The carpet beneath his worn sneakers was thicker than any bed he'd slept on in months, and the smells, oh, the smells. They made his empty stomach ache with longing. As Tommy scanned the room, his gaze fell on the couple in the corner. The man exuded an aura of power and confidence that fascinated Tommy, but it was the woman who held his attention. There was something about the way she kept glancing at her husband, then away, that struck Tommy as odd. A waiter approached their table, a fresh bottle of wine in hand. As he began to pour, Tommy saw something that made his blood run cold. A slight movement, so quick he almost missed it. The woman's hand slipping something into her husband's glass when he wasn't looking. Tommy's mind raced. He'd seen things on the streets, terrible things. He knew what it meant when someone slipped something into someone else's drink. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, he knew he had to act. Taking a deep breath, Tommy pushed himself away from the wall and began to run. The polished floor of the Starlight Bistro became a blur beneath Tommy's feet as he weaved between tables, his heart pounding in his ears. Startled gasps and angry exclamations followed in his wake, but he paid them no heed. His focus was singular. Reach the man in the corner before it was too late. "Hey you, stop right there!" The maitre d's voice boomed across the restaurant, but Tommy didn't slow down. He could see the man lifting the glass to his lips, the ruby liquid tilting dangerously close. "Don't drink that!" Tommy's voice, high and desperate, cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a knife. The businessman, Marcus Blackwood, froze, the glass mere inches from his mouth. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. In a move born of pure instinct, Tommy lunged forward, his small hand closing around Marcus's wrist. With a strength fueled by adrenaline, he pushed the man's arm away. The wineglass slipped from Marcus's grasp, tumbling through the air in what felt like slow motion, before shattering on the marble floor. The crash of breaking glass was deafening in the sudden silence that had fallen over the restaurant. Red wine spread across the floor like a sinister ink blot, seeping into the cracks between the tiles. Marcus stared at Tommy, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. Evelyn, her face drained of color, gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus's voice was low and controlled, but there was an edge to it that made Tommy flinch. Before Tommy could respond, 2 burly security guards appeared, their hands closing around his thin arms. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood," one of them said, his voice gruff. "We'll remove this. A disturbance immediately." "Wait," Tommy cried out, twisting in the guard's grip. "I saw something strange." "Don't drink it." Marcus held up a hand, silencing the guards. There was something in the boy's eyes, a desperation that went beyond mere mischief. "Let him speak," Marcus said, his gaze never leaving Tommy's face. Tommy swallowed hard, suddenly, aware of all the eyes on him. I saw her," he said, pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn. "She put something in your drink when you weren't looking." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Evelyn let out a nervous laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "That's absurd," she said, her voice higher than usual. "He just wants attention, probably hoping for a handout." Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her for what felt like the first time in years. He saw the tightness around her eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them. He saw the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for her own glass. In that moment, a chill ran down his spine. He knew his wife, or at least he thought he did. He knew every gesture, every sigh. And right now, everything about her was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Marcus turned to one of the security guards. "Call the police," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind, "and have someone analyze the contents of that glass." As one guard pulled out his phone, the other maintained his grip on Tommy. The boy stood still now, his eyes darting between Marcus and Evelyn. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The other diners watched in hushed fascination as a police officer arrived, followed shortly by a man in a lab coat who carefully collected samples of the spilled wine. When the results came back, the restaurant erupted into chaos. Evelyn, her composure finally cracking, burst into tears as the police led her away in handcuffs. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the ground seeming to disappear beneath his feet. As the commotion swirled around him, Marcus found his gaze drawn back to the small, dirty boy who had changed everything. Tommy stood there, looking lost and more than a little scared, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked over to Tommy. The boy flinched slightly, as if expecting to be scolded or worse. Instead, Marcus knelt down in front of him, bringing himself to eye level with the child who had just saved his life. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Tommy," the boy stammered. "Tommy Harris." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Tommy Harris," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You saved my life tonight, and I think it's time I returned the favor." As Tommy looked up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes, Marcus felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope for a future he hadn't known he was missing, until this very moment. Little did either of them know. This was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would change not only their lives, but the lives of countless others in ways they could never have imagined. The next few hours passed in a blur for Tommy. He found himself whisked away from the Starlight Bistro in a sleek black car, the leather seats cool and unfamiliar beneath him. Marcus sat beside him, talking on his phone in a low, urgent voice, while Tommy pressed his face against the window, watching the city lights streak by. They pulled up in front of a towering hotel, its facade gleaming with 1,000 lights. Tommy's mouth fell open as he craned his neck to see the top of the building, which seemed to disappear into the night sky. "Come on, son," Marcus said gently, guiding Tommy through the grand lobby. The boy's worn sneakers sank into the plush carpet, and he couldn't help but marvel at the crystal chandeliers and ornate furnishings. A smartly dressed woman approached them, her smile warm but professional. "Mr. Blackwood, everything has been arranged as you requested. The presidential suite is ready." Tommy's eyes widened. He'd heard of presidential suites before, but only in movies. He never imagined he'd see one in real life, let alone stay in one. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Tommy's mind raced. What was happening? Why was this rich man being so nice to him? Was this all a dream? The suite took Tommy's breath away. It was bigger than any place he'd ever lived, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting the soft light from elegant lamps. A massive bed dominated one room, piled high with fluffy pillows and a comforter that looked cloud-soft. This is all for me?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "For tonight, yes. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent." As Tommy explored the suite, touching everything with a mix of awe and trepidation, Marcus made some calls. By the time Tommy had finished his wide-eyed tour, a kind-faced woman had arrived with several bags of clothing. "These should fit you," she said, laying out a pair of soft pajamas. "Why don't you take a nice hot bath and change? I'll have some food sent up for you." Tommy couldn't remember the last time he'd had a proper bath. The bathroom was bigger than some apartments he'd stayed in, with a tub that could have doubled as a small pool. He soaked until his fingers pruned, reveling in the warm water and the scent of the fancy soap. When he emerged, clean and dressed in the softest clothes he'd ever worn, he found Marcus waiting for him in the living area. A cart laden with covered dishes stood nearby, the aroma making Tommy's mouth water. "Sit down, Tommy," Marcus said, gesturing to the plush sofa. "We need to talk." As Tommy perched on the edge of the seat, still afraid to fully relax into such luxury, Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "What you did tonight was incredibly brave," he began. "You saved my life, and I want to make sure you understand how grateful I am." Tommy fidgeted with the hem of his new shirt. I just did what felt right," he mumbled. Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what makes it so special. Now, I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to be completely honest. With me, okay?" Over the next hour, as Tommy ate his fill of the most delicious food he'd ever tasted, he told Marcus his story. He spoke of parents lost to illness and addiction, of foster homes that never quite felt like home, of nights spent huddled in doorways and days spent scrounging for food. Through it all, Marcus listened intently, his expression a mix of sympathy and growing determination. When Tommy finished speaking, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the glittering cityscape. "Tommy," he said finally, turning back to face the boy, "I want to help you, not just for tonight but for good. I want to make sure you have everything you need, a home, an education, a future. Would you like that?" Tommy stared at Marcus, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You mean it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Marcus knelt in front of Tommy, looking him straight in the eye. "I mean it. You showed incredible courage and kindness tonight. You deserve a chance at a better life, and I want to give that to you." Tears welled up in Tommy's eyes, and before he knew what he was doing, he threw his arms around Marcus's neck. The businessman stiffened for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace. As they pulled apart, both a little embarrassed by the display of emotion, Marcus cleared his throat. "Well, it's been a long night. Why don't you get some sleep? We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow." Tommy nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. As he climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into its softness, he could hardly believe how much his life had changed in just a few short hours. Just before he drifted off to sleep, Tommy heard Marcus's voice from the doorway. "Good night, Tommy. Sweet dreams." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Tommy fell asleep feeling safe, warm, and full of hope for the future. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. Tommy stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar softness surrounding him. As consciousness slowly returned, the events of the previous night came flooding back, and his eyes snapped open. He was still here. It hadn't been a dream. Sitting up in the enormous bed, Tommy took in his surroundings with fresh wonder. The opulent room seemed even more incredible in the light of day. He pinched himself just to be sure, and winced at the sharp pain. Definitely not a dream. A soft knock at the door startled him. "Tommy, are you awake?" Marcus's voice called from the other side. Yes," Tommy replied, his voice still thick with sleep. Marcus entered, already dressed in a crisp suit. He smiled warmly at Tommy. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Tommy nodded, still somewhat in awe of the man who had so drastically changed his life overnight. "Excellent. There's a new set of clothes for you in the bathroom. Why don't you get dressed and we'll have some breakfast? We have a busy day ahead of us. As Tommy showered and dressed in clothes that actually fit him, a novelty in itself, he couldn't help but wonder what Marcus had planned. The events of the past 12 hours felt surreal, like something out of a movie. When he emerged from the bathroom, he found Marcus waiting for him in the suite's dining area. A spread of breakfast foods that made Tommy's eyes widen was laid out on the table. "Eat up," Marcus encouraged. "You'll need your strength today." As they ate, Marcus outlined his plans. "First," he said, "we're going to visit my lawyer. We need to sort out the legal aspects of your situation." Tommy's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Legal aspects?" Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "You're a minor, Tommy. If I'm going to help you, we need to do it properly. I want to become your legal guardian." Tommy's breath caught in his throat. You want to adopt me?" "In a manner of speaking, yes," Marcus replied. "At least for now. It's the best way to ensure I can provide for you and make decisions about your care and education." Tommy's mind reeled. Just days ago, he had been sleeping in alleyways and scrounging for food. Now one of the richest men in the city wanted to be his guardian. It was almost too much to process. "What do you think about that, Tommy?" Marcus asked gently. Tommy looked up at Marcus, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all he saw was genuine concern and determination. I think I'd like that," Tommy said softly. Marcus smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Tommy's shoulder. "Good. Then let's get started." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. They visited Marcus's lawyer, a stern-faced woman who softened visibly when she heard Tommy's story. Papers were signed, calls were made, and by lunchtime the initial steps towards Marcus becoming Tommy's legal guardian were underway. Next, they visited a doctor for a thorough checkup. The doctor clucked sympathetically as he examined Tommy, prescribing vitamins and a special diet to help him regain the weight and strength he'd lost during his time on the streets. As they drove through the city in Marcus's sleek car, Tommy couldn't help but press his face against the window, marveling at how different everything looked from this view. As Marcus's car glided through the city streets, Tommy felt as if he were seeing everything for the first time. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling sidewalks, the vibrant storefronts, it all seemed brighter, more alive than he'd ever noticed before. "Where are we going now?" Tommy asked, tearing his gaze away from the window to look at Marcus. The businessman smiled, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "We're going to get you some new clothes and then we have an appointment at Brightwood Academy." Tommy's brow furrowed. "Brightwood Academy? What's that?" "It's one of the best schools in the city," Marcus explained. "I've arranged for you to take some placement tests. We need to see where you are academically so we can get you caught up." A knot of anxiety formed in Tommy's stomach. He hadn't been to school in over a year, and even before that, his attendance had been spotty at best. I don't know if I'm smart enough for a place like that," he admitted quietly. Marcus reached over and placed a reassuring hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Intelligence isn't just about what you know, Tommy. It's about your capacity to learn and grow. You've shown incredible quick thinking and bravery. I have no doubt you have the potential to excel." Tommy nodded, not entirely convinced but comforted by Marcus's faith in him. Their first stop was at an upscale children's boutique. Tommy felt out of place among the pristine white walls and carefully arranged displays, but the staff, clearly recognizing Marcus, were nothing but kind and helpful. As he tried on outfit after outfit, each more expensive than anything he'd ever owned, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that this was all temporary, that at any moment he'd wake up back, on the streets, cold and hungry. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, noticing Tommy's subdued demeanor as they left the store, arms laden with bags. Tommy hesitated, then decided to voice his fears. Is this all real? Are you really going to keep helping me?" Marcus's expression softened. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with Tommy. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Tommy. What I'm doing for you isn't charity or a whim. You saved my life. More than that, you showed character and courage that many adults lack. I meant what I said last night. I'm going to make sure You have every opportunity to build a better future for yourself. That's a promise." Tears welled up in Tommy's eyes, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. Marcus pretended not to notice, giving the boy a moment to compose himself. Their next stop was Brightwood Academy, a sprawling campus of ivy-covered brick buildings and manicured lawns. Tommy's eyes widened as they pulled up to the imposing gates. Students in crisp uniforms milled about, their chatter and laughter filling the air. "Ready?" Marcus asked as they got out of the car. Tommy took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The next few hours were a blur of tests and interviews. Tommy did his best to focus, to prove that Marcus's faith in him wasn't misplaced. By the time they finished, his head was spinning with math problems, reading comprehension questions, and scientific theories. As they waited for the results in the headmaster's office, Tommy fidgeted nervously. Marcus, sensing his anxiety, tried to distract him with stories about his own school days. Finally, the headmaster returned, a stack of papers in hand and a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well, Mr. Blackwood," he began, "young Tommy here is certainly an interesting case." Tommy's heart sank. He knew it. He wasn't smart enough for a place like this. But the headmaster continued, "While there are certainly gaps in his education, as we expected, Tommy has shown remarkable aptitude in several areas. His problem-solving skills are particularly impressive, and he has a natural curiosity that will serve him well." Marcus beamed, squeezing Tommy's shoulder. "So what do you recommend?" The headmaster leaned forward, his eyes kind as he addressed Tommy directly. "With some intensive tutoring to catch you up, I believe you could join our incoming class this fall. It will be challenging, but if you're willing to put in the work, I think you could thrive here." Tommy felt a surge of emotions, relief, excitement, and a determination he'd never felt before. He looked up at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll work hard," Tommy promised. "I won't let you down." As they left the school, Tommy felt as if he were walking on air. For the first time in his life, he had a clear path forward, a chance at a real future. "I'm proud of you, Tommy," Marcus said as they got back into the car. "You did great in there." Tommy smiled, a warm glow of pride spreading through his chest. But as they drove away from the school, a thought occurred to him. "Marcus," he asked, hesitantly, What about my mum?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "I've had my people looking into that. We'll find her, Tommy, I promise, and we'll do whatever we can to help her too." Tommy nodded, a mix of hope and apprehension swirling in his chest. As the car wound its way through the city streets, he realized that this new life, as wonderful as it was, wouldn't erase his past. But maybe, just maybe, it could help him build a better future. Not just for himself, but for those he cared about too. As days turned into weeks, Tommy's new life began to take shape. The presidential suite had been exchanged for a comfortable room in Marcus's penthouse apartment, with views of the city that still took Tommy's breath away. Each morning, he woke up to the smell of breakfast being prepared by Marcus's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, a kind-faced woman who had taken to fussing over Tommy as if he were her own grandson. Tommy's days were filled with intensive tutoring sessions, preparing him for the academic challenges that lay ahead at Brightwood Academy. At first, the sheer volume of information he needed to absorb felt overwhelming. There were times when he wanted to give up, convinced that he'd never catch up. But Marcus's unwavering faith in him, combined with his own determination not to squander this second chance, kept him going. To Tommy's surprise, he found that he actually enjoyed learning. Math, which had once seemed like an indecipherable code, now revealed itself as a fascinating puzzle. Reading, which he'd always struggled with, opened up new worlds of imagination and knowledge. And science? Well, that was quickly becoming his favorite subject, filled with wonders he'd never even dreamed of. But it wasn't all studying. Marcus made sure that Tommy had time to just be a kid, too. They went to baseball games, visited museums, and even took a weekend trip to an amusement park. For Tommy, who had never experienced such simple pleasures, each outing was a revelation. As Tommy's world expanded, so did the ripples of his actions on that fateful night at the Starlight Bistro. The story had exploded in the media, capturing the public's imagination. Street boy saves millionaires. Life, the headlines proclaimed. Tommy found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. At first, the attention terrified him. Reporters clamored for interviews, photographers tried to snap his picture whenever he left the apartment. But Marcus shielded him from the worst of it, fiercely protecting Tommy's privacy and allowing him to adjust to his new life without constant scrutiny. One evening, about a month after that night at the restaurant, Marcus called Tommy into his home office. The boy entered hesitantly, still sometimes feeling out of place among the rich furnishings and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Come in, Tommy," Marcus said warmly, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "There's something I want to discuss with you." Tommy sat down, his legs dangling above the plush carpet. "Am I in trouble?" he asked, a flicker of his old insecurity surfacing. Marcus chuckled. "Not at all. Quite the opposite, in fact." He leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Tommy, do you remember when I promised to change your life?" Tommy nodded. How could he forget? "Well," Marcus continued, "I've been thinking about how to best fulfill that promise, and I've realized that what happened to you, being given a second chance, shouldn't be a one-time thing. There are so many other children out there who need help, who need hope." Tommy's eyes widened as he began to understand where Marcus was going with this. "I'm starting a foundation," Marcus announced, the Second Chance Foundation. Its mission will be to help children like you, kids who've fallen through the cracks of the system, who just need an opportunity to show what they're capable of." "Wow," Tommy breathed. That's amazing, Marcus." Marcus smiled. "I'm glad you think so, because I want you to be a part of it." "Me?" Tommy squeaked, surprised. "Yes, you, your story, your courage. That's what inspired all of this. I think you could be a powerful voice for other kids who are struggling. Of course, only if you want to," Marcus added quickly. "I understand if it's too much." Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking it over. The idea of speaking publicly, of sharing his story, was daunting, but then he thought about all the kids out there who were like him, hungry and alone, with no hope for the future. If he could help even one of them. "I want to do it," Tommy said firmly. "I want to help." Marcus beamed, pride shining in his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that. We'll start small, okay? Maybe a short interview or a speech at a fundraiser. And I'll be with you every step of the way." As Tommy left Marcus's office that night, his mind was whirling with possibilities. For so long he'd felt powerless, at the mercy of a world that seemed indifferent to his suffering. Now not only had his own life been transformed, but he had the chance to help transform the lives of others. For the first time, Tommy began to see that his past, all the hardships he'd endured, all the challenges he'd overcome, wasn't just something to be ashamed of or to try to forget. It was a source of strength, a well of empathy that could help him connect with and inspire others. As he got ready for bed that night, Tommy caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at him was still, recognizably, the same street kid who darted between tables at the Starlight Bistro. But there was something different in his eyes now, a spark of hope, of purpose. Tommy Harris, once invisible to the world, was about to become a beacon of hope for countless others. And this, he realized, was just the beginning. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at the Starlight Bistro. Tommy, now settled into his new life, was thriving. His tutoring sessions had paid off, and he was holding his own at Brightwood Academy. The Second Chance Foundation was up and running, already making a difference in the lives of dozens of children. But on a crisp autumn morning, as Tommy sat at the breakfast table, absently munching on toast while reviewing his history notes, everything changed once again. Marcus entered the room, his face grave. "Tommy," he said softly, "there's something we need to talk about." Tommy looked up, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. He'd learned to read Marcus's moods pretty well over the past months, and right now something was clearly wrong. Marcus sat down across from Tommy, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "We've found your mother," he said without preamble. The history book slipped from Tommy's suddenly numb fingers, landing on the table with a dull thud. My mum," he whispered. Marcus nodded. She's in a rehabilitation center upstate. She's been there for about 3 months now. A whirlwind of emotions swept through Tommy. Hope, fear, anger, longing. His mother had been the one constant in his life, even when that constancy meant shared suffering. He'd loved her fiercely even as her addiction tore their lives apart. Is she okay? Tommy asked, his voice small. She's doing better, Marcus said gently. The center reports that she's been making good progress. And, Tommy, she's been asking about you. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. She has? Marcus reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Tommy's arm. She wants to see you, if you're willing. But I want you to understand that this is entirely your decision. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Tommy's mind raced. For months he'd pushed thoughts of his mother to the back of his mind, focusing on his new life, his studies, the foundation. But now, faced with the reality of her reappearance, he realized that a part of him had never stopped hoping, never stopped wondering. I think I want to see her, Tommy said slowly. But will you come with me? Marcus smiled softly. Of course. We can go this weekend if you'd like. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Tommy. He found it hard to concentrate in his classes, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of his mother. What would she look like? Would she be proud of him? Angry that he'd seemingly moved on without her? When Saturday finally arrived, Tommy was a bundle of nerves. The drive to the rehabilitation center felt both endless and far too short. As Marcus's car pulled into the parking lot, Tommy's hand instinctively reached for the door handle, then hesitated. It's okay to be scared, Marcus said softly. This is a big step. Remember, I'm right here with you. Tommy nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The rehabilitation center was nothing like Tommy had imagined. Instead of the sterile, hospital-like environment he'd expected, he found himself in a place that looked more like a peaceful retreat. Gardens surrounded the main building, and through the windows he could see comfortable lounges and art therapy rooms. A kind-faced counselor met them in the lobby, explaining that Tommy's mother had been prepared for this meeting and was waiting in a private visitation room. As they walked down the hallway, Tommy's heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it, and then suddenly they were there. The counselor opened the door and Tommy stepped inside. She was sitting by the window, her back to the door. But even from behind, Tommy would have recognized her anywhere. Her hair was longer than he remembered, and she seemed smaller somehow. But when she turned at the sound of the door, her face lit up in a way Tommy hadn't seen in years. "Tommy," she breathed, rising from her chair. "Oh, my baby boy." For a moment, Tommy stood frozen, overwhelmed by the surge of emotions. Then, with a choked sob, he rushed forward into his mother's arms. They clung to each other, both crying, years of pain and longing pouring out in that embrace. Marcus and the counselor quietly stepped out, giving mother and son a moment of privacy. When they finally pulled apart, Tommy's mother cupped his face, in her hands, her eyes drinking in every detail. "Look at you," she said softly. "You've grown so much and you look happy." Tommy nodded, wiping at his eyes. "I am, Mum, but I've missed you so much." They sat down and Tommy's mother took his hands in hers. "I'm so sorry, Tommy," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry for everything I put you through, but I'm getting better now. I'm fighting. This for you." As they talked, Tommy felt a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying start to lift. His mother listened with tears in her eyes as he told her about Marcus, about school, about the foundation. She in turn shared her struggles with recovery, her determination to make amends. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There was still hurt, still trust to be rebuilt. But as the visit came to an end, Tommy felt a glimmer of something he'd thought he'd lost forever: hope for his family. As they walked back to the car, Marcus placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. Then he looked up at Marcus, a small smile on his face. I think this could be a new beginning, For both of us. Marcus nodded, pride and affection clear in his eyes. I think you're right, Tommy, and whatever happens next, we'll face it together. As they drove back to the city, Tommy gazed out the window, his mind whirling with possibilities. He'd thought his life had already changed as much as it could, but now he realized that this journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. Rebuilding his relationship with his mother wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Tommy felt truly, completely hopeful about the future. This unexpected turn wasn't an ending, he realized. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The weeks following Tommy's reunion with his mother were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Regular visits to the rehabilitation center became a part of Tommy's routine, each one a delicate balance of hope and caution. Marcus, true to his word, supported Tommy through every step of this new journey. As autumn deepened into winter, Tommy found himself facing new challenges. At school, he was thriving academically, but the social aspects of Brightwood Academy were proving to be a different kind of test. Many of his classmates came from privileged backgrounds, and despite the school's efforts to integrate Tommy, he often felt like an outsider. One crisp December afternoon, Tommy sat alone on a bench in the school courtyard, watching his breath form small clouds in the cold air. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice someone approaching until a voice broke through his reverie. Hey, Tommy, is it okay if I sit here? Tommy looked up to see Emily Chen, one of his classmates. She was clutching a textbook to her chest, looking slightly nervous. Sure, Tommy said, scooting over to make room. Emily sat down, fidgeting with the corner of her book. I wanted to talk to you, she said. I've been meaning to for a while, actually. Tommy raised an eyebrow, curious. He and Emily had never really spoken before, beyond the occasional group project. I saw you on TV, Emily blurted out, the interview you did about the Second Chance Foundation, and I wanted to say I think it's really cool what you're doing. Tommy felt a mix of surprise and warmth at her words. The interview had been terrifying. He'd been so nervous he'd nearly been sick beforehand, but Marcus had been right there with him, a steady, reassuring presence. Thanks, Tommy said, a small smile tugging at his lips. It's important to me. Emily nodded, enthusiastically. I can tell, and it got me thinking. Well, my parents run a tutoring program for underprivileged kids in the city. I help out sometimes. I was wondering if maybe the foundation might want to partner with them somehow. Tommy's eyes widened. This was unexpected, but exciting. That could be really great, he said. I'd have to talk to Marcus, Mr. Blackwood, about it, but I think he'd be interested. Emily beamed. Really, that would be amazing. As they continued to talk, the ice between them slowly melting, Tommy felt a shift in the air. For the first time since coming to Brightwood, he felt like he was making a real connection with one of his peers. Over the next few weeks, Tommy found himself spending more time with Emily. She introduced him to her friend group, and slowly but surely, Tommy began to feel less like an outsider at school. Meanwhile, the potential partnership between the Second Chance Foundation and the Chen family's tutoring program began to take shape. Tommy threw himself into the project, working closely with Marcus to iron out the details. One evening, as they sat in Marcus's home office reviewing proposals, Tommy looked up from his notes. Marcus, he said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Marcus set down his pen, giving Tommy his full attention. Of course, what's on your mind? Tommy took a deep breath. I was wondering, do you think it would be possible for my mom to be involved in the foundation somehow? Once she's finished with her rehab program, I mean. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That's an interesting idea, Tommy. What did you have in mind? Well, Tommy said, gaining confidence as he spoke, I was thinking, she's been through so much, and she's working really hard to get better. Maybe she could talk to other parents who are struggling, help them see that it's possible to change, to be better for their kids. Marcus nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. That's a brilliant idea, Tommy. It would need to be handled carefully, of course, but I think it could be incredibly powerful. Your mother's journey could inspire a lot of people. Tommy felt a warmth spread through his chest, The idea of his mother not only recovering, but using her experiences to help others, it was more than he'd dared to hope for just a few months. Ergo, as winter melted into spring, Tommy's world continued to expand. The partnership with the Chen family's tutoring program was a resounding success, bringing new resources and opportunities to children who desperately needed them. At school, Tommy was no longer the outsider. He had friends, was active in clubs, and even made the junior varsity baseball team. And his mother, she was making remarkable progress. Her eyes, once clouded by addiction, now shone with determination and hope. She threw herself into her recovery program with the same fierce love she'd always had for Tommy, channeling it into a determination to be the mother he deserved. One sunny Saturday in April, Tommy stood on a small stage in a community center, looking out at a sea of faces. It was the launch event for the newest initiative of the Second Chance Foundation, a program aimed at supporting parents in recovery and their children. To his left stood Marcus, pride radiating from every pore, and to his right, looking nervous but resolute, stood his mother. As Tommy stepped up to the microphone, he felt a moment of vertigo. How had he gotten here? From a street kid with no hope to this, standing before a crowd about to introduce his mother, as she shared her story for the first time. But then he caught his mother's eye. She gave him a small nod, love and encouragement shining in her gaze. And he knew. This was exactly where he was meant to be. "Good afternoon, everyone," Tommy began, his voice strong and clear. "My name is Tommy Harris, and I'm here to tell you that second chances are real. I know because I got one. And now I'd like to introduce you to someone else who's embracing her second chance, my mom, Sarah Harris." As the crowd applauded and his mother stepped forward, Tommy felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun that night in the Starlight Bistro was closing. But it wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, not just for him and his mother, but for all the lives they were now in a position to touch. Tommy Harris, once invisible, was now a beacon of hope. And he was just getting started. As spring blossomed into summer, Tommy found himself facing new challenges. The whirlwind of changes in his life had been exhilarating, but now, as things settled into a new normal, he began to grapple with the complexities of his transformed world. One warm June afternoon, Tommy sat in the shade of a large oak tree on the Brightwood Academy campus, his algebra textbook open on his lap, but his mind far away. The school year was coming to an end, and while his grades were good, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. "Earth to Tommy," a voice broke. Through his reverie, he looked up to see Emily standing over him, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "You okay? You've been staring at that same page for like 10 minutes. Tommy sighed, closing the book. "Just thinking," he said. Emily plopped down beside him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Want to talk about it?" For a moment, Tommy hesitated. He'd grown close to Emily over the past months, but there were still parts of himself, parts of his past, that he kept guarded. But looking at her open, caring expression, he decided to take a chance. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, you know?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "Don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful for everything. But sometimes I look around and I can't believe this is really my life now. And I wonder, do I really belong here?" Emily was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "I think I get it," she said slowly. "It's a lot of change to process. But Tommy, you do belong here. You've earned your place here, more than most of us have." Tommy smiled weakly. "Thanks. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm split in two. There's the Tommy who goes to Brightwood and lives with Marcus and works with the foundation. And then there's the Tommy who used to sleep in alleyways and dig through dumpsters for food. And I don't know how to reconcile those two parts of myself." Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. "Maybe you don't have to reconcile them," she said softly. "Maybe both of those Tommies are part of who you are. And maybe that's what makes you special." Tommy felt a lump form in his throat. "You really think so?" Emily nodded emphatically. "I know so. Look at all the good you're doing with the foundation. That wouldn't be possible without both parts of your experience." As they continued to talk, Tommy felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. He realized that he'd been bottling up these feelings for weeks, afraid to voice them to Marcus or his mother for fear of seeming ungrateful. That evening, Tommy decided to talk to Marcus about his feelings. To his surprise and relief, Marcus listened with understanding and empathy. "Tommy," Marcus said, leaning forward in his chair, "what you're feeling is completely normal. You've been through an extraordinary amount of change in a very short time. It's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes." Tommy nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. I don't want to let you down," he admitted in a small voice. Marcus's expression softened. "You could never let me down, Tommy. I'm proud of you every single day, not just for your achievements, but for who you are as a person. Your compassion, your resilience, your determination to help others, those are the things that matter most." As summer progressed, Tommy threw himself into his work with the Second Chance Foundation with renewed vigor. He began to see how his unique perspective, straddling two very different worlds, could be an asset rather than a source of conflict. One project in particular became close to Tommy's heart. Inspired by his own experiences, he proposed a mentorship program that would pair children from disadvantaged backgrounds with successful professionals who had overcome similar challenges in their youth. "The idea," Tommy explained excitedly to Marcus one evening, "is to show these kids that their current circumstances don't define their future, that they can dream big and achieve those dreams no matter where they're starting from." Marcus beamed with pride. "That's a fantastic idea, Tommy. Why don't you take the lead on developing this program?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Me? Really?" Marcus nodded. "Really? You've more than proven yourself capable, and your personal experience makes you uniquely qualified to shape this program." As Tommy dove into the project, he found himself drawing on both sides of his experience, his street smarts and survival skills, as well as his newfound knowledge of business and philanthropy. He realized that Emily had been right. Both parts of him were valuable. Both had something to contribute. The mentorship program launched in late August, just before the new school year began. At the kickoff event, Tommy stood on stage once again, this time to introduce the first group of mentors and mentees. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces. Marcus beaming with pride, his mother, her eyes shining with tears of joy, Emily and his other friends from Brightwood cheering him on. But he also saw new faces, children with the same look of cautious hope he'd once worn, adults who had walked similar paths and were now reaching back to offer a helping hand. In that moment, Tommy felt the two halves of himself align. He wasn't split in two, he was whole, the sum of all his experiences, good and bad, and he was exactly where he was meant to be. As he began to speak, his voice strong and clear, Tommy knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more growing pains to navigate, but he was ready to face them, armed with the love and support of his newfound family, the strength of his past, and the boundless potential of his future. Tommy Harris, once a boy without hope, had become a bridge between two worlds. And in that role, he had found his true purpose. As autumn painted the city in hues of gold and crimson, Tommy found himself facing an unexpected challenge. The mentorship program he had spearheaded was thriving, changing lives one connection at a time. But with success came increased visibility, and not all attention was welcome. It began with a series of articles in the local newspaper. At first, they were positive, lauding the Second Chance Foundation's efforts and Tommy's inspiring story. But as the weeks wore on, the tone of the coverage began to shift. One chilly October morning, Tommy arrived at the Foundation's offices to find Marcus poring over a newspaper, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's wrong?" Tommy asked, shrugging off his jacket. Marcus hesitated, then pushed the paper across the desk. "I think you should see this," he said quietly. Tommy's stomach dropped as he read the headline, "Second Chance or Second Agenda? Questions arise about Foundation's motives." The article was a thinly veiled attack on the Foundation, insinuating that Marcus was using Tommy and the other children as a PR stunt to distract from his business practices. It even went so far as to question whether Tommy's rescue of Marcus had been staged. Tommy felt his face grow hot with anger and hurt. "How can they say these things?" he demanded. "Don't they know how much good we're doing?" Marcus sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, Tommy, success often brings scrutiny, and not everyone believes in second chances the way we do." Over the next few weeks, the negative press continued to mount. Tommy found himself avoiding the news, dreading each new headline. But worse than the articles were the whispers he began to hear at school. One afternoon, as he was leaving his last class, Tommy overheard a group of students talking in hushed tones. "I heard it was all fake," one boy said, "like they hired that kid to pretend to save Blackwood." "No way," another chimed in. "But I bet Blackwood's just using him to make himself look good. I mean, why else would he take in some random street kid?" Tommy felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. He hurried past the group, his cheeks burning with shame and anger. For the first time in months, he felt like an outsider again, the street kid who didn't belong. That evening, unable to concentrate on his homework, Tommy found himself wandering into the living room where Marcus was working. "Can we talk?" Tommy asked hesitantly. Marcus immediately set aside his laptop, giving Tommy his full attention. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Tommy took a deep breath. I've been hearing things at school in the news. People are saying that all of this is fake, that you're just using me for publicity." Marcus's expression darkened. "Tommy, I hope you know that's not true. What we're doing here, it's real, it matters." "I know," Tommy said quickly. "I do, it's hard to hear those things, and I'm worried it might hurt the foundation." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Tommy, do you remember what I told you the night we met? About how you showed character and courage that many adults lack?" Tommy nodded. "Well, this is another chance to show that courage. We're doing good work, important work. We can't let a few negative voices drown that out." Tommy felt a spark of determination ignite in his chest. "You're right," he said. "So what do we do?" A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "I think it's time we remind people why we started this foundation in the first place, and I have an idea how we can do that." Over the next few days, Marcus and Tommy worked tirelessly on a plan. They reached out to some of the children and families who had been helped by the foundation, asking if they would be willing to share their stories. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people came forward, eager to tell the world how the Second Chance Foundation had changed their lives. A week later, Tommy found himself once again standing on a stage, this time at a press conference. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a group of people, children, parents, mentors, all with stories to tell. As the cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Tommy stepped up to the microphone. He took a deep breath, thinking back to that night in the Starlight Bistro, to all the challenges he'd overcome since then. "My name is Tommy Harris," he began, his voice steady and clear. "A year ago, I was a homeless kid, with no hope for the future. Today I stand before you as living proof that second chances are real." One by one, the people behind Tommy came forward to share their stories. A single mother who had been able to go back to school thanks to the foundation's support. A teenager who had been on the verge of dropping out but was now headed to college. A former addict who had turned his life around and was now mentoring others. As the stories unfolded, Tommy could see the skepticism in the reporters' eyes begin to fade, replaced by genuine interest and even emotion. At the end of the conference, a reporter raised her hand. "Tommy," she said, "what would you say to those who doubt the sincerity of your story or the work of the foundation?" Tommy paused, considering the reporter's question carefully. He could feel all eyes on him, waiting for his response. In that moment, he felt the weight of his journey, from a scared, hungry kid on the streets to the person he was today. "I would say," Tommy began, his voice clear and strong, "that the truth speaks for itself. Look around this room. Listen to these stories. These aren't actors or paid spokespersons. These are real people whose lives have been changed, including mine." He took a deep breath, then continued, "I know there are skeptics out there. I understand that. In fact, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here today, I probably wouldn't have believed them either. But that's the thing. About second chances, they can seem impossible until you experience one yourself. Tommy's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with the reporters. I can't control what people choose to believe, but I can control what I do with the chance I've been given, and I choose to use it to help others, to pay it forward, because I know firsthand how much a single act of kindness can change a life. As the press conference concluded, Tommy felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The reporters swarmed around him and Marcus, asking for more details, more stories. But amidst the chaos, Tommy caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room. His mother, Sarah, stood quietly by the door, her eyes shining with pride. Tommy excused himself and made his way over to her. "Mom," he said, engulfing her in a hug, "I didn't know you were coming." Sarah squeezed him tight. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world, sweetheart. You were amazing up there." As they pulled apart, Tommy noticed something different about his mother. There was a new confidence in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "How are things going?" he asked, suddenly realizing that with all the recent chaos, he hadn't checked in with her as often as he should have. Sarah smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that warmed Tommy's heart. "Really good, actually. I've been volunteering at the rehab center, talking to other parents who are struggling. It's helping, I think, them and me." Tommy felt a surge of pride and love for his mother. They had both come so far, both found ways to turn their pain into purpose. As the days passed, the tide of public opinion began to turn. The negative articles were replaced by positive ones, highlighting the real impact of the Second Chance Foundation. Tommy's inbox was flooded with messages from people inspired by his story, asking how they could help or get involved. But more importantly, Tommy found a new sense of peace within himself. The doubts that had plagued him, the feeling of being split between two worlds, began to fade. He realized that every part of his journey, the hardships, the triumphs, the lessons learned, had shaped him into the person he was meant to be. One evening, as Tommy sat in Marcus's study, poring over plans for a new foundation initiative, he looked up to find Marcus watching him with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" Tommy asked, curious. Marcus smiled, shaking his head slightly. "I was just thinking about how far you've come. You know, when I first brought you home, I thought I was the one doing the saving. But the truth is, Tommy, you've saved me just as much as I've helped you." Tommy felt a lump form in his throat. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "Before that night at the restaurant, I was lost. In a way, I had success, money, power, but I'd lost sight of what really mattered. You reminded me of the power of compassion, of the importance of giving back. You've given me a new purpose, Tommy, and for that, I'll always be grateful." As Tommy absorbed Marcus's words, he felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. From a chance encounter born of desperation had grown something beautiful, a family forged not by blood but by choice and love. The road ahead would not always be smooth, Tommy knew. There would be more challenges, more doubters, more obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he was no longer facing them alone. He had Marcus, his mother, his friends, and an entire community of people whose lives had been touched by second chances. As he looked out the window at the city skyline, Tommy felt a surge of determination. The story that had begun that night in the Starlight Bistro was far from over. In fact, he realized it was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring. As winter descended upon the city, bringing with it a blanket of pristine snow, Tommy found himself standing at a crossroads. The Second Chance Foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations, touching thousands of lives across the country. Tommy, now 16, had become a respected voice in discussions about youth homelessness and education reform. But with growth came new challenges. The foundation was receiving more requests for help than they could handle, and Tommy felt the weight of each unanswered plea. He knew that for every child they helped, there were dozens more still waiting for their chance. One frosty December morning, Tommy sat in on a board meeting at the foundation. As he listened to the discussion about budget allocations and program expansions, an idea began to form in his mind. It was audacious, perhaps even impossible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it could be a game changer. When there was a lull in the conversation, Tommy cleared his throat nervously. "I have an idea," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "I think we need to think bigger." All eyes turned to him, and Tommy felt a moment of panic. But then he caught Marcus's encouraging nod, and he pressed on. "What if," Tommy began, his words gaining momentum as he spoke, "instead of just helping individual kids, we tried to change the system itself? What if we lobbied for policy changes that could help all kids in situations like mine?" And the room was silent for a moment, and Tommy felt his cheeks flush. But then Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Go on, Tommy. What kind of policy changes are you thinking about?" Encouraged, Tommy outlined his vision. He talked about pushing for increased funding for education in underprivileged areas, about creating more comprehensive support systems for families at risk of homelessness, about reforming the foster care system to better serve the needs of children. As he spoke, Tommy could see the excitement building in the room. Board members were nodding, jotting down notes, already beginning to discuss how they could make this happen. But one voice cut through the growing enthusiasm. "It's a noble idea," said Mr. Jameson, one of the older board members, "but it's not realistic. We're a small foundation. How could we possibly influence national policy?" Tommy felt his heart sink, but before he could respond, Marcus spoke up. "We may be small," he said, his voice firm, "but we have something powerful on our side. We have the truth, we have real stories of lives changed. And if there's one thing I've learned from Tommy, it's that a single voice, speaking the truth, can change the world." The meeting ended with a sense of nervous excitement. The board had agreed to explore Tommy's idea to see if they could make it work. As people filed out of the room, Marcus pulled Tommy aside. "That was impressive," Marcus said, pride evident in his voice. "But I hope you realize what you're getting us into. This won't be easy. We'll be up against powerful interests, entrenched systems. Are you ready for that fight?" Tommy took a deep breath, considering Marcus's words. He thought about all the kids out there who were like he had been, scared, alone, with no hope for the future. He thought about how different his life could have been if someone had intervened earlier. "I'm ready," Tommy said, his voice steady. "We have to try, for all the kids who haven't gotten their second chance yet." Marcus smiled, squeezing Tommy's shoulder. "That's what I hoped you'd say. All right then, let's change the world." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Tommy threw himself into research, learning everything he could about policymaking and advocacy. He worked with experts to refine his ideas, to turn his vision into concrete policy proposals. The foundation launched a massive awareness campaign, sharing stories of lives changed and lives still waiting to be touched. Tommy found himself speaking at conferences, giving interviews, meeting with politicians. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the task seemed impossible. But every time Tommy felt like giving up, he'd remember the fear and hopelessness he'd felt on the streets. He'd think of all the kids still out there, waiting for someone to fight for them, and he'd find the strength to keep going. As spring bloomed, bringing new life to the city, Tommy stood before a congressional committee. His heart was pounding, his palms sweaty, but his voice was clear and strong as he shared his story and his vision for change. "I stand before you not just as Tommy Harris," he concluded, "but as a voice for all the children who can't be here today. Children who are hungry, scared, and losing hope. We have the power to change their lives. All we need is the will to do it." As Tommy finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. He saw tears in the eyes of some of the committee members, saw them leaning forward with interest as they began to ask questions. Later that evening, as Tommy and Marcus watched the news coverage of the hearing, Marcus turned to Tommy with a smile. "You did it," he said softly. "You got them to listen. This is just the beginning, but it's a huge step." Tommy nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and elation. He knew there was still a long road ahead. That change wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time, he felt like it was truly possible. As he looked out at the city lights, Tommy thought about how far he'd come, from a scared kid in a fancy restaurant to someone who could stand before Congress and fight for change. He thought about all the people who had helped him along the way. Marcus, his mother, his friends, the countless supporters of the foundation. And he realized that this moment, this fight, was what his second chance had been leading to all along. This was his purpose, his way of paying forward the kindness that had changed his life. Tommy Harris, once invisible, had become a voice for the voiceless, and he was just getting started. The years that followed Tommy's congressional testimony were a blur of activity, challenges, and hard-won victories. The Second Chance Foundation had evolved from a small local organization into a national force for change, with Tommy at the forefront of its efforts. Now at 21, Tommy stood at the podium of a grand hall addressing a room full of politicians, philanthropists, and community leaders. The occasion was the 5-year anniversary of the passing of the Second Chance Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation that had been born from the seed of Tommy's idea all those years ago. 5 years ago, Tommy began, his voice strong and confident, we dared to dream of a world where every child, regardless of their circumstances, would have the opportunity to reach their full potential. Today, we're here to celebrate not just a dream but a reality in progress. As Tommy spoke, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The late nights poring over policy documents, the heated debates with opponents, the small victories that had, slowly but surely, added up to significant change. The Second Chance Act had increased funding for education in underprivileged areas, reformed the foster care system to prioritize stable, long-term placements, and created comprehensive support programs for families at risk of homelessness. It wasn't perfect, no legislation ever was, but it was making a real difference in the lives of thousands of children across the country. But our work is far from over, Tommy continued, his passion evident in every word. Every day I meet children and families whose lives have been transformed by these changes, but I also meet those who are still waiting for their chance. They remind me that we can't stop, we can't rest, until every child has the opportunity to succeed. As Tommy concluded his speech to resounding applause, he felt a familiar hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Marcus, his hair now more grey than black, beaming with pride. "You never cease to amaze me, Tommy," Marcus said, pulling him into a hug. Tommy smiled, feeling a rush of affection for the man who had become so much more than a benefactor, a mentor, a friend, a father figure. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said. "Oh, I think you would have found a way," Marcus chuckled. "You're too stubborn not to." As they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, Tommy caught sight of a familiar face. His mother, Sarah, was chatting animatedly with a group of women. In the years since her recovery, Sarah had become an integral part of the Foundation's work. Her experiences had made her an invaluable resource in developing support programs for parents struggling with addiction. Seeing her now, confident and passionate about her work, filled Tommy with joy. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Tommy found himself on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below, each one representing a life, a story, a potential waiting to be unlocked. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Emily approaching. They had remained close friends through the years, with Emily now serving as the Foundation's head of educational programs. "Quite a night, huh?" she said, leaning on the railing beside him. Tommy nodded, a contented smile on his face. "Sometimes. I still can't believe how far we've come." Emily bumped his shoulder playfully. "Well, believe it. You did this, Tommy. You took your second chance and turned it into second chances for thousands of others." As they stood there, looking out over the city, Tommy felt a sense of peace wash over him. He thought about the boy he had been, hungry and hopeless on the streets. He thought about all the children out there who were still in that position, and all the ones who had been given a chance to escape it. There was still so much work to do, so many lives still to touch. But in that moment, Tommy allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had been accomplished. From a single act of courage in a high-end restaurant had grown a movement that was changing lives across the nation. As the cool night air brushed against his face, Tommy made a silent promise. To himself and to all the children still waiting for their chance. He would keep fighting, keep pushing for change, keep working to create a world where every child had the opportunity to reach their full potential. because he knew, better than anyone, the power of a second chance, and he was determined to make sure that power touched as many lives as possible. 10 years had passed since that fateful night at the Starlight Bistro. Tommy Harris, once a scared and hungry street kid, now stood tall as a beacon of hope and change. At 25, he had accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime, but for Tommy, the journey was far from over. On a crisp autumn evening, Tommy found himself back at the Starlight Bistro. The restaurant had changed little over the years, still exuding an air of elegance and exclusivity. But this time, Tommy wasn't sneaking in through the service entrance. He was an honored guest here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Second Chance Foundation. As he entered the familiar space, memories washed over him. He could almost see his younger self, dirty and desperate, darting between the tables. But the fear and hopelessness of that night had been replaced by a deep sense of purpose and gratitude. The restaurant had been closed for the private event, filled instead with faces both familiar and new. Marcus, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, was deep in conversation with a group of politicians. Sarah, Tommy's mother, was chatting with some of the foundation's beneficiaries, her eyes bright with the joy of a life reclaimed. As Tommy made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing quick conversations, he found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the restaurant. There, he came face to face with a young boy, no more than 12, looking around, the room with wide, awe-filled eyes. "Hello there," Tommy said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "I'm Tommy. What's your name?" "Michael," the boy replied shyly. "My mom's over there." He pointed to a woman talking animatedly with Emily. Tommy smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Michael. Are you enjoying the party?" Michael nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Tommy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is it true that you used to be homeless?" Tommy's smile softened. "Yes, it is," he said gently. "I was about your age when it happened." Michael's eyes widened. "But now you're—" He gestured around the grand restaurant, seemingly at a loss for words. "Now I'm here," Tommy finished for him. "And do you know why?" Michael shook his head. "Because someone gave me a chance," Tommy said. "And that's what we're trying to do for kids like you, to give you the chances you deserve." As Tommy talked with Michael, sharing stories and answering questions, he felt a sense of completion. This, he realized, was why he had worked so hard, why he had pushed through every obstacle. For moments like this, where he could connect with a child who might be feeling lost or hopeless and show them that change was possible. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chiming of a glass. Marcus was standing at the front of the room, ready to make a speech. Tommy gave Michael an encouraging smile and made his way to join Marcus. 10 years ago, Marcus began, his voice strong despite his age, a young boy showed me the true meaning of courage and compassion. That boy, Tommy Harris, not only saved my life, but inspired a movement that has touched countless lives since. As Marcus spoke about the Foundation's achievements, Tommy found his mind wandering back over the years. He thought about the challenges they'd faced, the setbacks that had almost derailed their efforts. But more than that, he thought about the victories, big and small. He remembered the first time a child who'd been helped by the Foundation graduated high school, the day the Second Chance Act was passed, the opening of their first dedicated youth center. Each memory was a testament to the power of second chances, of what could happen when people believed in the potential of others. And now, Marcus was saying, pulling Tommy back to the present, "I'd like to invite the heart and soul of the Second Chance Foundation to say a few words." "Tommy." As Tommy stepped up to address the crowd, he felt a moment of déjà vu. How many times had he stood before groups like this, sharing his story, advocating for change? But this time felt different, special. 10 years ago, I stood in this very restaurant, hungry, scared, and without hope, Tommy began. I couldn't have imagined then where that night would lead. But thanks to the kindness and belief of one man, and then of so many others, I stand before you today not as a success story, but as a testament to what's possible when we give people the chances they deserve. Tommy paused, his eyes scanning the room. He saw his mother, tears glistening in her eyes, Marcus beaming with pride, Emily nodding encouragingly, and there at the back, young Michael listening with rapt attention. The work we've done, over the past decade, has changed thousands of lives, Tommy continued. But there are still so many out there waiting for their chance. Children sleeping on the streets tonight, families teetering on the edge of homelessness, young people who can't see a way forward. His voice grew stronger, filled with passion and determination. Our work is far from over. But standing here tonight, looking at all of you, the supporters, the beneficiaries, the dreamers and the doers, I know that together we can create a world where second chances aren't the exception, but the rule. Where every child, regardless of their circumstances, has the opportunity to reach their full potential. As Tommy concluded his speech to thunderous applause, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. For Marcus, for his mother, for every person who had believed in him and in the power of second chances. Later that night, as the party wound down, Tommy found himself once again on the sidewalk outside the Starlight Bistro. But this time, instead of hunger and fear, he felt hope and determination. He looked up at the star-filled sky, thinking about all the lives still waiting to be touched, all the potential still waiting to be unlocked. Tommy Harris, once a boy without hope, had become a man who created hope for others. And as he stood there, on the very spot where his journey had begun, he knew that this was still just the beginning. There were more lives to change, more systems to reform, more second chances to create. With a smile on his face and purpose in his heart, Tommy turned and walked into the night, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Because he knew that with compassion, determination, and the power of second chances, anything was possible. You might also like one of the 2 videos on your screen. Feel free to watch them now or subscribe to the channel to watch them later. Thanks for watching.